morning, Joy. Thank you for being here. Thank you for allowing me the honor and privilege of being in this pulpit. If you've heard me preach before, this will be nothing new for you. If you have not heard me preach before, I begin all of my sermons the very same way, and that is with an apology. And this time, a little extra apology. We do not let Essie play with bricks at our house. If you work for child services or know someone that does, I promise, those just Legos. My real apology is because I know that coming to church, especially for the very first time, is hard. Coming into a space where you don't know what to expect, who's going to be there, how welcome you may be, how authentic you'll be allowed to be, is difficult. So my guess is you did your research, you did your homework, you came not just to an open and affirming church, but to, in the words of Reverend Terry, a gay church.
There we go.
And you saw the rainbows and you heard the music and you thought, okay, all right. And then the person preaching is a cis straight white guy, which is just exactly what we were trying to get away from. And the apology is intentionally from this pulpit because my guess is that the words of harm probably came from pulpits similar to this. And you probably didn't receive the apology you needed or deserved from the pulpit that should have given it. And so from this pulpit, we are sorry. I am sorry. And you are beloved. You are welcome here. Your full, authentic self is welcome here. Please keep coming back. The pulpit may be lowered a little bit, but the preaching will be elevated. And in all seriousness, Reverend Terry is a wonderful and visionary leader of this congregation. We are beyond blessed to have her. We welcome you into this community, and we hope that you continue to come back and feel a sense of belonging in this space.
Amen.
And now, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. This series has been talking about faithful resistance, and this week we are diving into prophetic guidance. In the first week of this series, we looked at being able to imagine that which seemed impossible to imagine, hoping in God's hope when our human hope wasn't quite enough. And really that kind of imagining of that which seems impossible, that is ultimately the work of a prophet. This week, we're going to look a little bit at the prophets in the biblical tradition so that we can better understand some of our spiritual ancestors and recognize what that means for our own calling today. Now, when we think of prophets, so often we tend to think of fortune tellers, but that's not exactly what the biblical description is. In an episode of On Being with Krista Tippett, if you haven't checked it out, it's a great podcast. But Krista Tippett had a guest, Walter Brueggemann, who's a Hebrew Bible prophet and scholar. He gives this job description, kind of a prerequisite, if you will, for prophets. He says there are two things that are important, it seems to me. They are, on the one hand, that the prophets are rooted in the covenantal traditions, like from Moses and Sinai and all that. And the other is that they are completely uncredentialed, without pedigree. So they just rise up in the landscape. The way I put it now is that the poets imagined their contemporary world differently according to their old tradition. So it is both tradition and imagination. Two things I'd like to say about this. The first is that I love how Brueggemann slides very casually into calling prophets poets. That's important and intentional, and we'll come back to that in a minute. And the second is that if these are the prerequisites of the job descriptions of prophets, then I believe God is calling each and every one of you in your own way to be a prophet. Here and now, today. You may be thinking, who, me? Who am I to be a prophet? Little old me? I am not a poet. I don't have fancy words. I'm not the right age for that. I don't have the qualifications. Moses says he's slow of speech and tongue. Jeremiah is only a boy. Amos is a shepherd. You see, God does not call the equipped, God equips the called. So now that you've all agreed to be prophets, let's see, and folks laugh first service too. I'm serious.
That's our agreed.
Okay, all right. That's laugh if you agree. All right, excellent. Let's look at this job you've just signed on to. What does it mean to be a prophet and a poet? Brueggemann, this is another quote from him, goes on to say that this is the job that they are called to. I think that they are moved the way every good poet is moved, to describe the world differently according to the gifts of their insight. And this is why we need so many of you to be prophets and poets, because we don't need more of my insight, we need more of yours. We need Jihans, we need Als, we need Dyrans, we need your insight so that the world may better imagine that which we cannot yet imagine. And of course, in their own time and every time since, the people that control the power structure don't know what to make of prophets, and so they characteristically try to silence them. What power people always discover is you cannot finally silence poets. They just keep coming at you in threatening and transformative ways. Let's be honest about this. You've all just agreed to be prophets, great. And then you're realizing that there are some very real consequences to having this imagination. In fact, in the text that we read today, John is writing to Jesus from prison. And thank you, Catherine, for your wonderful reading. That was very wonderful. But why is Jesus in prison? Or why is John imprisoned? What has led him to that state? What happened was he critiqued Herod. Herod, who was the king at the time. He critiqued Herod for marrying his half-brother's wife, Herodias. John the prophet said, imagine if we had leaders who had standards and dignity and did not take advantage of other people. John was being political, and for that Herod had him imprisoned. And for a little extra bit of some seminary knowledge here for you, Bible 101, I know Mark loves this stuff. Jesus says, when he's talking to the crowd, he said, when you went out to listen to John, what were you listening for? A reed to be disrupted by the wind? Now, the reed was kind of the family symbol of Herod's family. It would be as if somebody spoke today against perhaps one of the leaders of our land and somebody else were to say, what did you expect, an orange to fall from its tree? You laugh because it connects with you. And I share that just as an example so you can understand this is what the original hearers know when Jesus is talking about this. There's an awareness that what John was doing and saying was confrontational to the powers that be. Unfortunately, prophetic guidance doesn't always end well for the prophets. A lot of the Hebrew Bible prophets we read about aren't exactly revered for their work. Many are harshly treated. They're turned out, not because they told the future, but because they told the truth.
Amen.
And when we look at modern day prophets like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Harvey Milk, Assata Shakur, these people aren't future tellers, they're truth tellers, and look what has happened to them. Friends, this can be discouraging. And yet, where would our world be without their prophetic imagination? Where will the future world be without your prophetic imagination? In our text from today, John is trying to figure out if Jesus really is the one. Are you the one, or should we wait for another? This is undoubtedly related to some of the messianic questions of early Jewish traditions and their view of the end times, and I love Jesus' answer. Because Jesus responds by saying, the blind receive their sight, the lame walk, those with a skin disease are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. It's interesting because Jesus does not say, yes, I am the one. I was born of a virgin. I am God's chosen child. Jesus doesn't do that, but instead gives evidence to the changes that have happened in the lives of people that he has come into contact with. He answers the prophet's question with a prophetic answer. What Jesus is saying is that the prophetic imagination is not constructed in the halls of a palace or the courtyard of a church or a lecture hall in a seminary. It is worked on while we are workers, developed in line at the food pantry, overheard in a language that is new to us. It is dreamed up under the sun while we pick and thrive. It is under the moon while we sleep. And the prophetic imagination may not even be written down at the time because it's too busy being spoken or wept out loud. I wonder if John might have been a little disappointed in this answer. You see, John was confrontational, confronting the political powers that be, and there were many that hoped that the Messiah would mean an overturning of the empire. And there is an element of that, to be sure, in what Jesus says and does. But what Jesus' response is, it is to come in tenderness and love to those who, under the oppression of empire, thought their situation was hopeless. Jesus isn't flashy or giving a quick sign of political upheaval. Instead, he shows how simple and amazing things are happening to transform people's lives. That is the blueprint. We imagine the transformation even just for one person. We imagine a better world, a better tomorrow. And we need, saints, to imagine our way out of this.
Amen.
Reverend Barber, yes. Reverend Barber, who is the modern person who has picked up the torch of Martin Luther King Jr.'s Poor People campaign, which, by the way, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated while he was working on the Poor People's campaign specifically. Reverend Dr. Barber takes time to do research when he speaks. He gets scholars and economists to weigh in on what's going on because he says, if you're going to be loud, you better be right. And I hear in that echoes of John's question to Jesus, I'm going to be loud on your behalf. I want to make sure I'm right. And the statistics that Dr. Barber and the scholars and economists have unearthed tell a horrifying tale of what the realities facing poor people in this country are. This is a slide that tells about the story before the pandemic. In 2019, 140 million Americans were living in poverty or just one emergency away from economic ruin. That's 60% of Black people, 64% of Hispanic or Latino people, 40% of Asian people, 60% of Indigenous and Native people, and 33% of white people. These tens of millions of people live in every region, in every state in the country. Poverty was the fourth leading cause of death, claiming more lives than homicide, gun violence, diabetes, or obesity. Long-term poverty in 2019 was responsible for nearly 300,000 deaths a year, over 800 a day. The pandemic festered in these fissures, taking root in systemic racism, poverty and denial of health care, ecological devastation, wealth inequality, and rampant military spending. Are these the issues we should be speaking about as prophets, or should we wait for another? And then we see in the headlines these past few weeks, Lorenzo Araujo killed by ICE in Houston, and a 25-year-old father, Joan Sebastian Duran Guerrero from Colombia, living in Maine, who was authorized to work here, had a Social Security card, and the Maine Immigrants' Right Coalition says he wasn't even the target of the immigration operation. Are these the people we should be advocating for, or should we wait for another? Should we be speaking about childhood poverty here in Orange County, or the fact that we have had thousands of children go missing from our public schools because our state and national governments refuse to make schools safe spaces for parents, regardless of their immigration status, to be able to pick up and drop off their children, thereby weaponizing access to education as a trap for our neighbors who are already among the most vulnerable?
Right.
Are these the issues we should speak out about as prophets and poets, or should we wait for another? The prophetic imagination is about the day-to-day struggle to bring about newness. In her book, Mujerista Theology, Ada Maria Ezazi Diaz writes about the flowers of life that she received from her mother. And she says that her mother has given her the flower of understanding that la lucha es la vida. The struggle is life. For over half my life, she writes, I thought my task was to struggle, and then one day I would enjoy the fruits of my labor. And then I began to reflect on what my mother so often tells our family: all we need to ask of God is to have health and strength to struggle. This, she writes, has allowed me to be realistic, to understand that for the vast majority of women, life is a struggle. We don't get to opt out of the struggle, and if we think that we do, that is probably because of the privilege that has been afforded to us, unearned for us. And even when we think that and we take a step back or away, we are really never able to fully escape the struggle because we live in this world. We participate in it. To be a prophet and a poet is in some ways to acknowledge that this is part of our lives here. La lucha es la vida. The struggle is life. When a prophet poet sees the world as it is, they name the pain of what is that should not be, and they have space for lament. And thank goodness for the prophet poet among us, Reverend Terry, who has helped walk us from our lament to an amen. Thank you for your wonderful doctoral work. And she is, to be sure, a poet and a prophet, but I don't want that to ever block our own minds, because you don't see yourself up here or in a pulpit to think that you are not then also possibly a prophet and a poet as well. Again, Amos was a shepherd. There's no pulpit out in the fields, but there are prophets and poets there too. And we need to be imagining now. We need to hope. We need to dare to dream. The author of our guidebook for this series, Ginger Gaines Sorelli, writes, to be prophetic is to have the imagination, to hear and see God's grace, to imagine a world that seems unimaginable. Prophetic communities of sacred resistance will name the pain of a suffering world, but will not stop there. They will proclaim hope in the midst of all that is wrong, or in the words of the prophet, poet Wendell Berry, to be joyful even though you have considered all the facts. Prophetic witness is inherently hopeful because it shatters the illusion that the way things are now will forever be. That is the gift that our kids bring to us that we highlighted today in the children's moment. They help us imagine things that cannot be. They always ask why. And we need to hear that why and be able to imagine that there are other answers than just because. God empowers us as prophets to wake up with greater clarity, wisdom, and courage to stand up to the powers that be, to challenge the status quo, and to take risks for the sake of love and the hope of new life. In his seminal work, Prophetic Imagination, Walter Brueggemann argues that a true prophet is not merely a fortune teller, but a truth teller tasked with breaking the consciousness of dominant culture. A prophet's primary job is to criticize, read dismantle, the existing power structure, and energize, read inspire, the community with the promise of God's alternative future. When we dream, when we imagine, we are in good company. It may not always look like political revolution that John may have expected. It may not look like getting everything all right at once. It may look like what Jesus said, just giving hope to one person who the oppression of empire told them, you cannot have hope. Jesus' answer to John's question is not that empires are overthrown politically, it is that they are undermined by every single act of love that we put out into this world. By healing the sick for free and without asking for documentation, Jesus criticizes the healthcare system and energizes the people who were told that they were sick for a reason and had to stay sick. By eating with sex workers, Jesus criticizes the social order and energizes the people who have endured hardships that we can only imagine. By bringing good news to the poor, Jesus criticizes the economic structures and energizes those who are experiencing poverty. By packing care kits for our undocumented neighbors, we criticize the paramilitary force that murdered 2 people in the last 2 weeks, and we energize the people who are victimized by their brutality. By marching in the Pride Parade, we criticize a governor who would paint over the rainbow crosswalk outside of Pulse, and we energize just about everybody in a 10-mile radius of downtown Orlando. Saints, we are called to criticize, which means we find the lies so we can energize and organize so we can mobilize to see the kingdom rise. And when we do, we are active in our prophetic imagination. I want people to hear about JoyMCC, and when they ask, is that the church we've been waiting for, or should we wait for another? I want the answer to be, what do you see? A church that has provided a home for gay and lesbian Christians, a safe space for the trans community. They have a food pantry on Thursday and drag bingo on Friday. Amen. They have stood outside Alligator Alcatraz alongside indigenous people calling for it to be closed. They stand in prayer alongside those waiting to go in for their ICE appointments. The poor have good news in that church. Amen. Saints, God needs you, and I do mean you, to be a prophet and a poet. And if you don't feel up to the task, just remember that's step 1. That's good.